Have you seen me dice bag? The Grognard Files.
Hello, my name is Dirt the Dice, and this is the Grognard Files podcast, where we talk bobbins about tabletop RPGs from back in the day and today. I'm coming live from my den here in the heart of the northwest of England. I'm completely and utterly surrounded by my stuff. My huge lifetime accumulation of Michael Moorcock books are stacked by my side. They're well thumbed from years and years of revisiting his extensive back catalogue. Here on my right is the great library of RPGs and the collection of the Grognard Files. And here on my left is the ridiculous homemade shrine to the actor Caroline Munro. I'll just give it a tap. Ah yes, this time she's appearing in many guises. Anna de Antoni from Maniac, Carla the Gypsy, Victoria Regina Fibes, Laura Bellows, Stella Starr. The Eternal Champion is emerging as the Eternal Champion in honour of our special guest, Michael Moorcock. If you followed the Grog Pod, you'll know that our imaginations were shaped by the work of Michael Moorcock. He had such a tremendous influence on our gaming and our reading of fantasy and science fiction. He's been a constant reference point over the last 8 years of producing this bobbins. So it's with great pleasure that we present this episode, which features a lengthy interview with Mike. Following a brief exchange of emails with Linda, his wife, this interview is arranged, and we don't cover gaming in this discussion, as there are already some interesting podcast interviews out there. Appendix N Book Club podcast did a really good interview, as did Sanctum Secorum. They do a really good job of covering the influence that he's had on gaming. There's a link in the show notes. But Mike is not a gamer. I was more interested in exploring his memoir. His most recent book is The Woods of Arcady, the second of the Sanctuary of the White Friars trilogy, which began with The Whispering Swarm. And it's an autobiography of the fictional character Michael Moorcock, who has adventures in many worlds. There's a blend of liminal stories with memoir and high romance in these books, and they exemplify Moorcock as a science fiction writer. We also talk about Letters from Hollywood, a collection of letters which was published in 1986 when he was travelling around California. It features a very entertaining sequence where Mike is a Barton Fink-like character working with the director Irwin Kershner, fresh from the success of The Empire Strikes Back. We also talk about his other work in film, including The Final Programme and the ambitions for The Land That Time Forgot. We also cover the origins of Elric and how it came out of the comic book scene at the end of the 50s and early 60s. It was in that world that Mike developed his writing style, and he began to explore new definitions of science fiction and fantasy in New Worlds magazine. During the interview, you get a sense of his collaborative nature and his personal philosophies on how they've come to be exemplified in the multiverse. In the second section, the resident rules lawyer, Judge Blythe, sits behind the Games Master screen as we explore some of the games that have got the multiverse at their core. It's another long one, I'm afraid. Fill up a balloon glass with Vimto, sit by the fireside, grab a hobnob, and hear some of the tales of new worlds and beyond. I mean, if you're going to have a ramble, let's ramble with the best. Ramblers, let's get rambling. Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling, to the creator of A Million Spheres, who fostered the new wave of science fiction as a magazine editor at large, a pragmatic anarchist musician of the Deep Fix and others, and prolific author. And I feel duty bound to say, behold the man, Michael Moorcock. Hello, Mike.
Hello, Chris.
It's great to see you. You must be asked to do lots of these.
Oh, I don't mind a bit, yeah.
Where in the world are you, Mike, these days?
Well, at the moment, I'm in Paris. We have a small apartment in Paris. We come here every 5 or 6 months, where I work quite a bit. I mean, there's a game, as you probably know, that was coming out here. There's a lot of comics being done of my stuff. So I'm not really. People seem to think I'm having a great time, whining and dining and watching chorus girls at the Folies Bergère, but and going up the Eiffel Tower or whatever people do. But basically, I'm in a small apartment in a what's fundamentally a very mixed working class area of Paris, which I like. It reminds me of Notting Hill that I used to live in before it became obscene. And yeah, I mean that's where I am and what I'm doing.
And the rest of the time, are you resident in America?
In Texas, yes. Pretty much solidly in Texas now. I can't travel that much because I've got bad legs, and so it becomes a bit of a strain to do long journeys.
It's subject to extreme weather at the moment as well, isn't it, Texas?
So they say. It doesn't seem any more extreme than usual to me. I mean, there's a lot of, the press sort of notices things, you know how they are. If there's two people trip over a Union Jack in Oxford Street, it becomes a major riot. People keep asking us if we're safe and stuff like that. And honestly, we haven't. I mean, I know there have been some riots in the suburbs and so on, and some demonstrations in around Republic and Bastille and so on. But to be honest, we haven't seen anything but a few perfectly peaceful demonstrations. People walking through the streets with banners, chanting, and then they go away again. So it's the same with Texas. We keep seeing on the TV, Texas is burning. This is horrible degrees of heat. But they're actually no hotter than it usually is about this time of year. So I mean, I'm not. This is not me denying climate change, because I believe that, but they've taken a very poor example in Texas, because although it has been sort of fairly hot, it hasn't been much hotter. It has been hotter in other parts of the US, but not in Texas, really. Yeah. But part of the reason we come away at this time of year is to avoid that heat. Although, of course, we don't avoid it very easily because that heat follows us nowadays.
I've been enjoying Letters from Hollywood.
Oh, good.
Recently.
Yeah.
1986 with great illustrations by Michael Foreman.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because it's an example of memoir from a particular time of your life. It was quite a turbulent time. Like one of your heroes, you were on self-exile, weren't you, into the US? Yeah. What drew you there? I think it starts, doesn't it, because a friend's unwell, and that was the initial.
Yes, a friend of mine was a hard drinker, and he was only 32, 33, and he was dying of cirrhosis. He was also inclined to be a bit of a bullshitter, so I wasn't sure if he was dying of cirrhosis or not. So life was a bit up and down in England at the time, and I really wanted to get out of a rather tight circle of people. I don't really like being part of everybody knowing everybody in that way. So I decided that the best thing I could do was to go and visit him and see how he was doing. And if he was dying, of course, to be around him. As it turned out, he was, and he wasn't in very good shape. As I say in the book, I stayed at a friend of mine called Harlan Ellison, and Harlan had an assistant who was a librarian he'd hired to sort out his horrible library. When I say horrible, there was thousands of books and comics and all magazines and so on. And that was Linda, who I wasn't involved with anybody at the time, or rather, I'd got away so I wouldn't be involved with anybody at the time, to be more accurate. And we fell in love. I mean, it was neither of us had expected to do that. We both thought that was the end of it. We were never going to fall in love again, the usual stuff. So we did, and we traveled about together for a bit, up and down California and Mexico. We had a great time. Eventually, she came to England. I took her from sunny California to the Yorkshire Dales, where she wasn't. She was. It was a bit surprising for her, and we settled in Yorkshire for a bit. But the book is mostly about traveling around in California, and particularly the Hollywood area.
It takes the form of letters to J.G. Ballard, doesn't it? And it's like an epistolary travelogue, if you like.
Yeah, Jimmy, we've been close friends for a long time. He was then editing a magazine called Ambit, or rather, he was editing the prose in Ambit. So he said to me, I wrote him a letter soon after I'd arrived in Los Angeles. He liked the letter. He said, why don't you write me some more letters? Do me a bit of a story around it. So I did. I started writing him letters. There's edited letters. Some of the editing was had to be done, but because of I didn't want to get into trouble, for one thing. I got to see old friends, and I got a job working for Evan Kirshner, which was a bit of a nightmare. The guy did Star Trek, Star Wars. Sorry, oops. The Star Wars, second Star Wars movie, I think it was. He wanted to do a King Arthur story, and I've heard this so many times from film directors and producers, he wanted to be as authentic as possible. And of course, he didn't know what he was asking for. I did actually try to give him a 5th century Celtic warrior fighter at the end of the Roman occupation. But of course, this isn't really what he meant by authentic. And I make a few jokes in the book about what he was expecting. One of the best ones was, I think, the character has a black friend from the African Legion, of the Romans. He's come back from Rome, and he remarked famously, "Did they have black people back then?" as well as asking about Hadrian's Wall, is that real? And I said, well, it's a photograph. Yes, that's what Hadrian's Wall is. So it was a typical, one of those typical English writer goes to Hollywood and meets all the absurdities of Hollywood.
It's one of your great names as well. Yeah, you're giving the name of Ike Welper in the book as well.
Oh, do I? Yeah.
And talk about how he puts ripe melons in his closet to make his clothes smell of melon.
Absolutely, yeah. He all that kind of stuff. Yeah, he all was done with absolute seriousness and telling me confidentially, if you want to keep your clothes smelling fresh, what you need to do is put some ripe fruit in your closet, and it'll do the job. It was a nightmare working for him. I mean, every day was a nightmare. I was very glad to get home at the end of it. He wanted. I've worked with other directors like this, and you get to understand it pretty quickly. He wanted to be an auteur. He didn't actually have the means to be an auteur. That is to say, he didn't have the talent to be an auteur. But he really wanted to get the reputation of being an auteur. He wanted me to make him an auteur. And in the end, he wound up by saying he wanted to have the quality of Bergman with everybody, with no horses. That's right. And that's right, Kurosawa and of Kurosawa. So there were to be no horses in it, people just running around, presumably in sandals with samurai swords, I'm not quite sure. To the point where I deliberately wrote an unfilmable film because, I knew this was going nowhere. I just had the fun of writing something that I knew couldn't be filmed. And I got paid an extraordinary amount of money for writing a film that I knew wasn't going to be filmed. That's, again, not for the first time. Other people have done the same thing. I was being paid so much that I got all of my kids out out to Hollywood, and they had a great time. We visited a lot of the well-known spots in LA, Barney's Beanery and the Tropicana, and places like that. Had a pretty good time, really.
A different experience from doing The Land That Time Forgot then with Amicus.
Oh, that was a different deal. I mean, what happened with that was that I chose not to write the film of the final program because they'd said, would I write it? But I said, no, I don't have any experience of film writing, and I think it'd be better if somebody who did have experience of film writing would do it. And in fact, what happened was that somebody who had experience of film writing, but as an extremely bad film writer, started to try to make this movie in which he, among other things, this was the producer. No, sorry, not the producer. The producer was very good, a guy called Sandy Lieberson. But the director really had been an art director, again with aspirations to be an auteur. The job was so far removed from from my book, which I don't mind in films. I mean, I'm not someone who wants every scene to be exactly the same as in the book. But what I do want, and what a good director or producer will insist on, is that the spirit of the book be maintained. What this guy was doing, I was doing a book which I suppose was in some ways ahead of its time. Jerry, is bisexual, and generally, however many letters there are now for LGBT, Q, etc., in the community. I wanted him to represent that, which in the 70s was still pretty fresh. But I've always been like that, in that I've always I like characters who were not identified by their sex or by their race. That was Jerry Cornelius. Unfortunately, this guy was perhaps of a slightly older generation than mine, and so he started to make all sorts of terrible sexist jokes in the movie, which I really didn't like. In the end, John Finch, who was a friend of mine playing Cornelius, and some of the other, they had an extraordinarily good cast. I mean, it was the cast which saved the movie, because what happened is they came to me and they said, what's this film supposed to be? They were confused. And George Coullaris, who'd been in, the Orson Welles film, Citizen Kane, he comes up to me one day and says, young man. And I said, yes, Mr. Coullaris. He said, what's this movie supposed to be about? And I said, well, I don't know. And he said, there you are, he tells some of the other actors. Even the author doesn't know what it's about. And I of course, did know to a degree what it was about, but I no longer knew what it was about in the making of the film. This was about a third of the way through. So eventually the actors got together with me and asked me what I thought, the film was. One of them said, it seemed like it might be a comedy to me. And I said, yes, it's a comedy. And then they started to get it. Honestly, some of the very best lines in the film, most of the very best lines in the film, were the work of the actors. They were ad-libs. And I was very grateful to them. I mean, it was a whole bunch of good lines from pretty much every one of the actors. And I owed a lot to them that the film had any substance at all. But unfortunately, the director had, was still turning it into a bit of a mess. So anyway, when that was done, and I had lost about a year's work, it had depressed me so badly, I just didn't feel like working again. Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated insisted to the producers who wanted to buy some Burroughs properties, I be the writer on the film, because they knew that I'd got previous Edgar Rice Burroughs experience. I'd done an Edgar Rice Burroughs fanzine. I'd been editor of Tarzan Adventures, which was a juvenile weekly. They knew that I was not only familiar with the work, but that I would attempt to give it a decent script. So I met with them and they said, we're not going to go ahead with the movie unless you do it. So, it's up to you. And I thought, well, I need experience for film writing if I'm not going to have what happened with the final program happen again. I decided that I would, go ahead and do the movie. As it happened, it wasn't as good a ride as I'd hoped it would be. Jim Cawthorne, who's one of my very oldest friends and had been the main illustrator in the Burroughs fanzine and is, professional illustrator, was also a keen Burroughs fan. And we both really liked The Land That Time Forgot because it had an idea in it, which is frequently not the case in Burroughs. I mean, the idea is usually, girl gets captured, man follows girl, at the end uncaptures girl, and that's about the basic story. And in the meantime, what's on it are the inventive, romantic, good stuff, which I liked in Burroughs. But Land That Time Forgot had an idea which basically was a lost island, very typical King Kong and all of that. But this has actually been written before King Kong. On the island, the people go through the whole of sort of history of humankind and before that, the reptilian kind. I mean, all the way through the individuals slowly go from, say, lizards to people. It's a very nice idea. Scientifically, it's pretty weird, but it was one of the few solid ideas in Burroughs of that kind. And both Jim and I had always been attracted to it for that reason. Jim was going to have done a comic strip based on The Land That Time Forgot, but decided I don't think he could find somebody to run it. So, but he'd already broken it down as a story. We worked on a little bit more to tighten up the story because there's a very, very long bit of buggering about at the beginning where people take over a submarine, then they lose the submarine, and they take over the submarine again, stuff like that. So we cut, brought that down to something a bit more manageable and less boring, frankly. And then I wrote the script from that breakdown. But I also said, are you sure, that Burroughs, Edgar Rice Burroughs Incorporated, are going to supervise the script? And they said, oh, yes, certainly, that's the deal we have with Burroughs. So I said, no volcanoes going off at the end then, the usual ending of most Lost World movies at that time. And they said, no volcanoes going off at the end and so on. Well, of course, we were going on pretty nicely, I have to say. There were some pretty good actors in the roles. Again, rather slightly more experienced actors, not quite as good as, say, the best team of Hammer actors. Could have done with Peter Cushing in it, but there wasn't really a part for Peter Cushing in it, or Christopher Reeve. We got busy. We wrote the script, delivered the script, and off they went. And we would go out occasionally to see how the film was going, and it seemed to be going all right. Then one day I'm out at Shepperton. We're walking along one of the paths through Shepperton's land, and looking down, and I saw these sort of tubs like oil cans, big oil drums, buried in the path, and full of something sort of slightly familiar, but I couldn't quite make out what it was. And I said, what are those? And they said, well, that's the oatmeal. And I said, well, what's the oatmeal for? I don't remember there being much in the way of tubs of oatmeal in the original. And they said, oh, well, that's for, that's for when the volcano goes off. and people... and it's supposed to be lava. It always passes very well for lava, which apparently it does too, I have to say. But it's nearly always oatmeal, apparently. So I said, but I thought, etc., we weren't having any volcanoes. Well, this happened and that happened. We don't know if we're going to be, don't know how the movie's going to go, whether we're going to be able to make the sequels and so on and so forth. And I, of course, had written it because it was really 1/3 of a novel. There were 3 novellas made up the whole story, and the ending that I'd done was a rather melancholy sort of ending, where we don't know how the survivors, if they're ever going to get off the island, and they put a message in a bottle, that's how it starts, with the message being found in the bottle and the story being told that way. So I said to the horrible little producer, who was a classic, and I mean, there are many American producers who are not like this. A director, I'm sorry, not producer. In fact, I'd been working with Sandy Leverson on the final program, and Sandy had a very clear idea of what the final program was supposed to be. He was one of the team that had been involved in some very good English Renaissance films with David Putnam and people like that. But this guy was not like that. He was a classic sort of wisecracking, cigar-chewing, 3-foot-high bundle of ego. I mean, ego all the way. And so I put it to him, this is not what we're supposed to do. And he said, oh, well, this and that. So privately in my mind, I thought, right, I had a contract to do three stories based on Land That Time Forgot. And I thought to myself, no, I'm not doing any more of these. But Jim was I don't know whether he needed the money more. I mean, Jim was from Gateshead, and he never really spoke very much about his plans. I mean, he's extremely eloquent on paper, but very much a closed-mouthed Geordie on, otherwise. So he never really told me why he wanted to do this, but he decided he wanted to stay on the movies. So I said, fine, you stay on them, and I'll get off them. I mean, I didn't have any problems with that if they'll allow that. Well, in the end, Jim saw the beginnings of the second film, which was, I think, The People That Time Forgot, and it was so far removed from the book, he just couldn't carry on in all conscience. So Jim stepped off the picture.
Jim was very responsible in the early days for visualising Elric for you, wasn't he?
Oh, absolutely, yes. Yeah. Jim and I mean, we'd worked together right from the very beginning. I'd known him since I think I was about 15, 16. I'd used him an awful lot in Tarzan Adventures because I'd used the magazine to promote Burroughs' characters, John Carter and Deja Thoris and Tarzan and, all the rest of them. Essentially, Tarzan Adventures became a sort of a version of Burroughsiana, the fanzine I was doing. And Jim could write very well as well. He'd written serial for us, and he'd also scripted and drawn another serial for Tarzan. So when I was first talking about Elric, which would have been in I suppose about 1957 or 8. I hadn't been commissioned to write anything, but I was toying with the idea of a character like Elric. Jim at that time was still living in Gateshead, so I would write to him and send him a page or two of what I'd written of Elric. Jim would draw it and send it back, and it was just fun. We didn't have any plans to sell it to anyone. And so Jim had almost as much to do with the early visualization of Elric as I did. When I was working for Fleetway, IPC, were at that time the biggest comic magazine producers in the world, I think. I think DC liked to say they were, but they didn't have anything like our circulations. I mean, if we went below 750,000, we really thought we were in trouble. 1 million was kind of what we always aimed for. I was working for Fleetway on Sexton Blake Library for some time, and also writing a lot for things like Carl the Viking and with Don Lawrence, who's a very good artist, and various other very, very accomplished artists on various well-known stories for Lion Comic and Tiger Comic and the annuals. I was chiefly in charge of annuals because I was the only person who had done both. I'd worked on comics and on text. And because I knew how to lay out text, I was sort of brought in to do the annuals. I really developed my writing style developed largely through doing those annuals, I suppose, and the comics. And it teaches you tight way of writing. It's a pretty good training. One day I'd stopped. I was freelancing for IPC, but I was in the office and bumped into a friend of mine called Harry Harrison. Harry Harrison was a science fiction writer who'd done some very good, funny science fiction as well as some good. He did Make Room, which became Silent Green.
Stainless Steel Rat as well.
Yes, Stainless Steel Rat and Bill the Galactic Hero and so on. And he was doing Death World as a comic for one of the boys' papers. I think it might have been Boys' World. Harry said, I'm meeting a guy called Andy Vincent, who was, I think, the editor at that time of Boys' World. And we're going over to the pub. We're going to meet Ted Carnell there. Do you want to come? Well, I knew Ted Carnell. He was the editor of the main English science fiction magazines, New Worlds, Science Fantasy, and Science Fiction Adventures. Ted, a very nice guy. I'd told him some short stories, but nothing very spectacular. But we got on very well. So I was happy to go over. And while we're talking in the pub, he says to me, I told him that I'd been writing a Conan story for Fantastic Universe, an American magazine. This was through L. Sprague de Camp and a guy called Hans Staffen Sanderson, who was the editor. I was a professional writer. I'd pretty much write whatever anybody paid me enough for, So I told Ted this. He said, I was thinking that science fantasy could do with, a story or two like that, that same sort of thing. There was no name for sword and sorcery in those days. That was later worked out between me and Fritz Leiber in a magazine called Amra, which was a magazine for people who are interested in what became known as sword and sorcery. I said, I've been doing Conan's story for Hans. And he said, maybe you could do something for me. And cut a long story short, I did him what was my first Elric story. In the story, I pretty much finished him off. I didn't quite finish him off, but I finished the story off. It was just one short story called The Dreaming City. That was it. I didn't really expect anything else. It was about, 10, 15,000 words. Ted liked it and bought it. As it turned out, they were I say this with all due modesty, they turned out to be the most successful stories that he'd run for, in the magazine. So he asked for another. Well, again, being a working writer, I did him another, and that went down well, and the next one went down well, and so on. But it wasn't really enough to save the magazines from the publisher who decided to close them all down. This is not really the fault of the magazines as much as the decision by the publisher to get out of that kind of publishing. So Ted told me this. So I had to kill Elric off, so I did Stormbringer for the last 4 issues. And in fact, I pretty much filled up science fantasy with most of its fiction for the last few issues, because I was that's what Ted wanted. So that was it, Stormbringer, and I wrote an editorial in New World saying what a shame New World was going bust, or not going bust, but being stopped. That was published. In the meantime, another publisher came along and said, we'd like to publish New Worlds and science fantasy, so can we have a go? There was a negotiation. A friend of Brian Aldiss called Kirill Bonfilioli actually was a master swordsman for Balliol. He'd been an Olympic swordsman. He thought that I would rather do science fantasy, but in fact, I preferred to do New Worlds. The title had more scope than science fantasy. There it was. I started doing New Worlds, but and that's really where the so-called new wave of science fiction started. It was myself, Ballard, and a guy called Barry Bailey.
And you've incorporated those stories in your memoir, your fictionalized memoir, Whispering Swarm, which again I've been enjoying. You are a fictional character who knows you're a fictional character, but also really Michael Moorcock. Yes. What was the process of creating that in the fantasy world of Alsacia?
Actually, it it started, my sort of non-fantasy publisher, Jonathan Cape, I brought the Colonel Piat books to an end. And they were books about of comedy about the origins of the Holocaust, which had worn me out a little bit. And another book called Mother London, which I'd written in the meantime because the Holocaust had rather taken it out of me. And I wanted to do something a bit more celebratory too. So I did Mother London. So anyway, when this all came to an end, when Piat was finished, the publisher said to me, he said, "What are you going to do next?" I said, "Well, I'm not quite sure yet, what I'm doing." He said, "Why don't you write us a memoir?" And I said, "Well, the reason I haven't written a memoir, I've been asked before, was because if I do a fair memoir, if I do it accurately, I'm probably going to hurt some people's feelings, and I don't want to do that." And he said, "Oh, don't worry about that. We'll get the lawyers onto it. They'll put." And I thought that wasn't quite the point. I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. I wasn't worried about them suing me. In fact, I didn't think anybody would sue me, but I really was. It's a very difficult thing to tell the truth and to be as accurate as possible and not. Essentially, what you're doing quite often is contradicting someone else's version of the truth. I mean, everybody has their own version of the truth. When you get to a certain age, you know that, particularly if you're married, and you don't want to do that. So I said to him, "Well, I want to do that," and he said, "Well, that's what I want you to do." And I actually got a bit fed up. I mean, that we'll get the lawyers onto it was not my idea of the right response. I was over here in Paris telling my great friend Jean Fromental, who is, I think, acknowledged in The Whispering Swarm, and I said to him, I really, really left a bit of a bad taste in my mouth. He said, "Well, why don't you write a literary memoir that is, maybe done as fiction?" So I wasn't sure I could do that either. So I put it aside. I mean, I liked the idea, but I wasn't sure I was up to it, really. Eventually, after a lot of thought, I mean, this took some years before I could get the thing together properly. I decided I could do it. There was a way of doing it. And that was to include my ideas about the multiverse, which are a lot more sophisticated than, say, Marvel's, which, people have lifted the idea of the multiverse in order to keep telling the same damn story over and over again, and also to explain discrepancies, in other stories. And that wasn't quite what I was trying to do. So I actually wrote a comic called Michael Moorcock's Multiverse in the 90s. And there it is.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, there is a way of doing this in that there are alternatives to the truth. And I can tell the truth, but I can put it into a context where I'm also clearly not telling the truth as well. So it doesn't have to contradict somebody else's version of the truth per se. It could, it can do both. It can tell the truth and tell a pack of lies at the same time. Plus, it enabled me. I wanted to develop the idea of the multiverse a bit more and make it clear to readers that I wasn't just describing a bunch of alternate worlds or anything, that sort. That I was actually trying to describe a scientific or pseudo-scientific idea. These days, it's called a many worlds theory. I mean, and I had a number of ideas around that. If you like, somewhat more intellectual than those in Doctor Strange. Although I'm very fond of Doctor Strange, as a matter of fact, but nonetheless, this was it wasn't quite what I was trying to do. I took the ideas of Mandelbrot's chaos theory and his ideas of self-reproduction and so on, my idea is that if you did have such a thing as identical worlds, that they would you might not be able to see them because they might be too big to see or too small to see. That they might simply just be there but unseeable. The way that when you see a Mandelbrot set being reproduced, DVDs of a Mandelbrot set, changing very, very slightly, but not much at all, just tiny changes. After about 10 million of these, you might get a slightly different world, but not. Also, there might be repercussions to this. That you might not be able to exist in it just like that, and just switching from one to another. That you might have trouble with being too big or too small, and all sorts of other stuff like that. In the Whispering Swarm, which is the first of those, I didn't deal too much with the way the alternatives worked. It doesn't have a huge science fiction element as such, but it does tell these different stories, as well as a purely enjoyable idea of highwaymen who hold up trams, because I like highwaymen and I like trams. Tramway men, or whatever you call them, ride out at night with their big horse pistols and their masks and their three-cornered hats, and ride over to the Hampstead Heath and hold up the Hackney Express. And they ran out of a place that's been used before in fiction called Alsatia, which was a real area of Whitefriars where around Fleet Street. It suited the authorities of several centuries, actually, to allow people to go there and stay there. It's better to have them all the rogues in one place than it was to have them scattered through London. And also, the Whitefriars themselves were monks who gave sanctuary to people who were on the run from the law, essentially on the run from religious law at the time, but it gradually became on the run from any law. I conceived this first story, The Whispering Swarm. In it, I can hear this whispering going on, and I'm not sure what it is. And of course, it's the other worlds, really, and not just. I'm using it also as it's meant to show how we are as individuals, as well as the scientific idea. We have many different identities that we show to the world. And I have many different identities, like my practical identity, like paying the gas bill, as it were, and my imaginative identity, like holding up trams on Hampstead Heath. So that's how I started it. The second book, which is called The Woods of Arcady, which came out, I think, just a month or so ago, it's more to do with the kind of identities we put on ourselves when we're inventing things or reading things, or playing games, indeed, and taking on identities in which we pretend to be someone else. But it's also with the characters that I liked to pretend to be when I was a kid, in particular. So so that one is more about romantic adventure. It has Tarzan in it, not the real Tarzan, because I don't think I could be. I think ERB would think twice about that. But Tarzan type character, Alan Quatermain type character, and the Three Musketeers. Luckily, I think they're well out of copyright now. But a whole bunch of different romantic and enjoyable characters that we like to assume.
It was interesting to see Prince Rupert as a character, because I come from Bolton, and he's a bit of a hate figure because we're a parliamentary stronghold.
Yes,
and there was a big massacre up here by Rupert. So it's funny to see him as a hero.
Yes, well, quite. I mean, he is a hero too, as far as I'm concerned. A genuine. A genuine Protestant, as it were, not just a political Protestant. And he did actually have a lot of adventures. He went to various different parts of the world and all of that, and was interested in scientific ideas. So he's an ideal, he was ideal for me. And he comes back a bit in the third book as well, which is called The Wounds of Albion. It's closer to the format of the first one, the Whispering Swarm. the second one. The second one is more romantic and adventurous, and with probably a bit less autobiography in it. Yeah, and Prince Rupert is, trying to save poor old King Charles, and also I was trying to. I do this with quite a lot of the books that I've written, which is to introduce a genuine time which is is on the cusp of history, when there is a sort of a serious change in what's going on. So I was dealing with Cromwell in that, and not so much in the second one. There's it's a bit more fun. Although I think the others are fun. I hope the others are fun too.
Yeah, definitely, and funny as well.
Yeah, well, I hope so too. Yeah, well, I mean, that's, I like to make them laugh, make them cry, keep them reading.
I've got an incomplete collection of the multiverse comics, but I believe Titan are reprinting them later in the year.
Absolutely, and they're doing a better version than the DC version of the complete. For one thing, it's in hardback, although it's in 2 volumes, and the DC was only in 1 volume. But what DC did was cut out a lot of coming next week, or rather coming next month, sort of pieces, which are little plays on words to do with what's coming, and they contradict some of the stuff that is, it's not really happening. I mean, I say, coming next month, the edge of tomorrow or whatever, and that has nothing to do whatsoever but it means it's a combination of absurdism, which is like the Jerry Cornelius stories, for instance, and the Buggerly Otherly stories, which are also to do with my liking for that kind of fiction, to do with absurdism. William Burroughs being one of them, but quite a few others too. Maurice Richardson, in fact, being one of my favorites, which I would strongly recommend. It's The Adventures of Engelbrecht, which have been reprinted by the Manchester firm of Savoy, which I think there are still some copies. And I would, and if you have any hard-earned cash that you want to slip into something that's going to keep its value, then buy a Savoy edition of The Adventures of Engelbrecht, which are about the famous sporting dwarf Engelbrecht, who once fought 10 rounds with a grandfather clock. He's in the ring with a grandfather clock, and he has to borrow time from other members of his club in order to keep fighting the grandfather clock, who has got a lot more time than he's got. That's what happens. Anyway, so absurdism, and comedy is one of the things that I like to have in those books.
In The Whispering Storm, you say that every author is looking for the character that's going to define them. And we mentioned Elric, and clearly that's going to be a character that has been stolen so many times. But do you think that the multiverse itself is going to be your greatest legacy?
I don't know about legacy. I think I probably, my legacy is, I was saying this to a friend today, if I'm lucky another 50 years, people will never have heard of me. But I don't know, really. I think there's three things. Well, there's the Eternal Champion, which gives you a character who can live through other periods of time, experience other things. So he can be a real, ordinary person going through various ordinary adventures or experiences. So in a sense, in the multiverse, of course, links with that. These are all done very early on in my career. Eternal Champion was done when I was 17 initially. It became the Blood Red Game, I think it was, or the Sundered Worlds, which was, I think, 23 when I did that. So I'm really, these are very early ideas, which I've just increased the sophistication, I hope, of them. I don't know about legacy. It's a slightly, it's too posh a word, perhaps. People don't tend to remember who came up with certain ideas, and neither should they really. This is how things go. I'm pretty reconciled to that. I think of H.G. Wells, who first came up with the idea of alternate worlds. I didn't come up with the idea of alternate worlds. I just came up with the idea of a system, and what they would be called and how they could be used. Nobody thinks, a few people pay lip service to Wells, inventing the atomic bomb, which he did, he didn't invent it, but as we know from recent films, but he predicted the atomic bomb, again, based on other people's ideas. Now, the difference, I suppose, between me and Wells in this sense is that he did tend to base his ideas on existing scientific ideas, whereas I tended to come up with them without, not having read, as it were, previous scientific ideas. With the multiverse, there are a couple of people in the 1960s, pretty much around the same time as me, who were coming up with many worlds theories, much as I was. It's fair to say that they didn't precede me, but the idea was in the air. My feeling is the idea was in the air because of Hoyle, actually, Fred Hoyle, and his idea, or rather his popularizing of the idea of the expanding universe. Once you have an expanding universe, you have a world that is permanently entropic. I mean, it's just essentially disappearing. It takes a long time, but it gradually disappears. The universe expands until it's gas, then it's not anything really. This idea is very upsetting to most of us who don't like the idea of our substance vanishing, or the world's substance vanishing, or indeed our legacy vanishing. Around that time, people were coming up with metaphysical ideas, essentially, rather than physics, in which they really thought of alternatives to to the expanding universe. And if, for instance, you've got constantly replicating universe, or that fades and then reproduces itself, and keeps on doing that, keeps reproducing, then you've got an alternative which is acceptable to your fear of death. I mean, essentially, it's the fear of death, and so we half of what we do, if not all of what we do, is driven by the fear of death, of not wanting to die, or rather, not wanting our something we did that we think is important, or just just having kids or whatever it is. We don't want to die, so we invent all these alternatives, heaven and fairyland, and all sorts of places. And we, it's understandable. That's because we are thinking creatures, and we're terrified. And so I think that's largely how we came up with these ideas, or the various scientists, metaphysics people, and cheap science fiction writers like myself came up with these ideas because we were just gibbering terrified of it all going away forever. Whether, for all I know, we do what we invent becomes real. I mean, we may invent reality, in which case we're good for us. We're doing something useful. To me, that's why why the multiverse came into existence.
So, thanks, Mike, for spending this time with us. I just want to say that I told my mother that I was interviewing you today, and she said, "That's amazing. You've been surrounded by his books since you were a boy." So it's a great honour for me to spend this time with you. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Well, I enjoyed it. As one always enjoys talking about themselves.
Games Master Screen.
Welcome to the room of role-playing rambling. I've got Blythe with me.
Hello, Dirk.
No, we're not in the pub.
No.
We're in an unusual place, actually. We're up amongst the pigeons, aren't we?
In another bland municipal room somewhere.
The roof space with lots of pigeons. Yeah. There's quite a lot of pigeons around at the moment, isn't there?
There is. Rats with wings, as my dad always says.
Rats with wings.
Rats with wings.
I think part of it's down to the fact that the resident hawk that used to reside in the centre of...
Yes, there used to be a couple of hawks, didn't there?
Yeah.
And it kept them away, but not anymore.
They're back.
They're back.
Back with vengeance.
With vengeance.
Anyway, enough pigeon chat. We're here in a special Moorcock multiverse edition. We're going to talk about multiverses.
Okay.
Before we get to that, though, got a bit of a prefab sprout game. Are you ready for this?
Okay. Yeah, you like to put me through this, don't you? Prefab sprout game. Go on.
So what I've got here are the titles of 4 Moorcock short stories. 3 of the titles are legitimate. Mm-hmm. 1 of them I've made up.
Okay.
Now, for purposes that will come clear, I won't be able to give you a quick précis of the short story. I'm just going to give you the title.
Just the title, yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise I'll give too much away, won't it?
You mean I'd guess?
You'd be able to guess what it was, yeah. Okay, first off, the first one is Master of Chaos. Master of Chaos, is that?
Master of Chaos. Well, give me all.
Yeah, okay. The next one.
Master of Chaos, that's, it's got the word chaos in, hasn't it? There's a lot of that in Moorcock, so maybe, although.
The Swastika Setup.
The Swastika Setup.
Okay.
Okay.
The Quantum Assassin. The Quantum Assassin.
Okay, Quantum Assassin.
And finally, Gold Diggers of 1977, open brackets, 10 claims that won our hearts, close brackets. So which of those four?
The last one. So I don't like to be too critical of any of these titles, because you've interviewed me, you might be listening. I'm going to sit here and go, that sounds like a rubbish title. That sounds like some kind of rubbish you've made up. And it's not. It's something the great man has made up. So I don't like to be too, but the last one sounds ridiculous. Sorry, Mr. Moorcock, it does. Sounds ridiculous. And I don't think, it's too out there, that. You wouldn't have made that up, because it doesn't actually sound like a Michael Moorcock. If someone had said, is that a Michael Moorcock story? I'd have said, no.
Do you want me to say it again?
Yeah, go on. But I can't believe you made that up, because it stands out like a sore thumb. So unless you're being very, very generous towards me and giving me an obvious choice, I'd say that isn't one.
Gold Diggers of 1977, open brackets, 10 claims that won our hearts, close brackets.
No, I think that's a real one.
That's a real one.
Unlikely as it may seem, it seems so unlikely it must be real. I have a feeling the Quantum Assassin might be real as well. That rings a vague bell in the back of my mind somewhere, the Quantum Assassin. Okay. So what were the other 2? The Master of Chaos?
Master of Chaos and the Swastika Setup.
I'm going to say the Swastika Setup is the fake one.
The Swastika Setup is actually Jerry Cornelius' story.
Oh,
okay.
Every time. Go on.
The Gold Diggers of 1977, 10 claims that won our hearts, is actually the accompanying short story to The Great Rock and Roll Swindle.
Oh, okay.
So Mike Moorcock actually produced a story that accompanied the publicity material that's commissioned by Virgin in that way, like a newspaper format, and it was collected in the Casablanca collection. So that's a genuine.
It's Master Chaos, isn't it?
No, Master of Chaos.
It's the one I thought was a real one that I had in the back of my mind, the Quantum Assassin.
Quantum Assassin is one I've made up. Well, Master of Chaos actually appears in the Singing Citadel, and I actually covered it in the Appendix N when I appeared on that podcast.
Oh, right.
Talk about Singing Citadel.
So much attention I'm paying.
Yeah, well, I don't like to direct people to that one, because that's where the famous "This is a Book of Four Halves" incident.
Mind you, we're talking about the multiverse. So you could have a book of 4 halves, couldn't you, in the multiverse, really? Because you'd have 2 books with 2 halves each, and that's 4 halves.
The Quantum Assassin. Now, I made it up, but I didn't really make it up.
Right.
I asked ChatGTP to come up with a Michael Moorcock title.
Really? Wow.
And that was convincing, wasn't it?
It's come up with a convincing one, yeah. Yeah.
The Quantum Assassin.
It does sound like a sort of, not just a Moorcock story, but it sounds like a kind of 1960s, 1970s short story, doesn't it? Anybody really. It's kind of interesting that, isn't it, with that chat thing, because if you'd have said to me, it's a J.G. Ballard story, I'd think, oh yeah, I can believe that. Or any of those kind of writers, Quantum Assassin sounds quite a plausible short story title, doesn't it?
Yeah, maybe we should all be worried by that. Do you not think about it?
Yeah.
Possibly.
Maybe.
I want to talk about the multiverse because that's a creation by Moorcock.
Yeah.
And it's kind of ubiquitous these days when you look at like films, particularly like Marvel have adopted it, haven't they? And Everything Everywhere All at Once.
Yeah.
It's become a trope, hasn't it?
Yeah.
And I would say that RPGs tend to gravitate towards multi-worlds and multiverse.
I think it's a very appealing idea, isn't it? But I think it's something that needs to be handled with a lot of caution and a lot of care, because I think whenever you watch something, if you watch the Marvel films or other things, or even you play games that have multiverses in them, they can be great fun. Also, they can drift into being ridiculous and really irritating, I think, for me personally. I kind of blow on cold on them a bit. Sometimes multiverse, great, but other times I think, just an excuse for anything. Just an excuse for any old stupidity, isn't it? Some of the Marvel stuff, I think, at times drifts into that. It drifts into just, it's an excuse to be as silly as you like and then go, hey, it's just multiverse, isn't it? So don't worry about it. But other times it can be a great thing. In the right hands, it can be a great thing and an interesting thing. But in the wrong hands, it can be a bit daft.
It's got a scientific basis, and that's what Moorcock always refers to, doesn't it? Many worlds theory.
Yeah.
And I suppose it's got its roots in ancient science, I think, because I think it was originally the Greeks came up with this idea that things split and went off into different directions, but become popular. Well, it is a literary trope, but I think more than that, I think games gravitate towards it because of the freedom it gives you to do different things. And what characterizes them is that continuity of character. So there was appeal back in the day, back in the early parts of role playing, having D&D adventures that went into Gamma World, for example.
Oh yeah.
Because you could have the same characters.
Transplanting your characters into another universe, yeah. So a lot of D&D characters dropped into Gamma World, something like that.
At what point does it become unconvincing for you then in that? I think when we talked about that, we were less convinced in that free movement between Gamma World and the world of D&D.
I'd probably be all right with that now. That's okay. I think what it is it can be annoying when it's an excuse for just sloppily putting something together where, it's just, it's a multiverse. Oh, well, let's have a scene where everyone's a giant mushroom or something like that, or whatever. Just like daftness. I think that can be the problem with it. I suppose role-playing games, it can be a bit like that, can't it? There's a fine line, and we're gonna talk about this very shortly, but we've been playing Rogue Mistress, haven't we? Stormbringer, Rogue Mistress. And we've had discussions about this because you've said to me, you're running it, and you've said to me, oh God, it's daft. It's daft, haven't you? You've said at times it's daft. But as a player, quite enjoyed it. I've enjoyed it a lot. I think it's quite good. And I think that's the thing, it's a fine line to tread, isn't it, between daft and innovative and interesting, And I think very quickly, if you're not careful, you can go from being interesting to just being a bit, almost a bit boring. I found it's like those Doctor Strange. Yeah. They're like that. I just find them a bit boring. It sounds stupid because there's loads of stuff going on, but it's a bit boring because anything and everything's going on. Everything all at once, all going on, but a bit boring. I find it a bit tedious. But it's a fine line, isn't it, that people tread with it, I think.
So do you think that it's subjective then? That's part of the trouble that people have in these words? Because what kind of frustrates me sometimes is that the G word gets pulled out, doesn't it? The G torpedo.
The G torpedo.
Which is gonzo.
Gonzo, yeah, it's gonzo. Whatever that means. It's a bit like a discussion about pulp, a few years ago, isn't it? People say, it's like pulpy, isn't it? And what are we talking about? No one really knows quite what you mean. Gonzo's the same, isn't it? It's a bit gonzo. It's almost like people say it's gonzo if you don't like it.
Yeah. It does seem like, it does seem like a pejorative term.
Yeah.
Like this weekend, I ran my Delta Green meets Doctor Who.
Meets John Lennon.
Yeah. And that was described as gonzo. Now, I don't think it was gonzo. It was rooted within Doctor Who, which again is a multiverse. Universe. At what point does it become gonzo?
Yeah, I don't really know. It's a word that's used. It can be used in a pejorative way, but it can also be used as a defence for anything. Yeah, it's very gonzo.
Yeah.
Oh, is it? Right, okay. Yeah. If you say, I don't really like that, yeah, it's gonzo, isn't it? Yeah. As in, that's the defence for being daft. So I sound like I've got a downer on them. No, I don't want a downer on the multiverse. I'm a big fan of Moorcock, aren't I? So I do like the multiverse idea, but I think it's how it's handled, I think.
Yeah.
That's the thing. It's how it's handled. We were talking earlier in the week about, is it a quorum? You said in some of the quorum stuff.
Yeah.
There's like, it gets a bit daft, the multiverse thing. Whereas in Elric, for example, it's more just about this eternal champion existing in different realms that seem slightly more, sometimes a bit more, not plausible is the wrong word, not plausible, but a bit more controlled, I suppose.
Yeah. I think, the Young Kingdom books are more grounded in a setting.
Yes.
I think with Hawkmoon to some extent, when he heads east, or when Coram goes on his multi-world adventures, they become a little bit more surreal and juxtaposing different extreme images against each other. And it becomes then, I don't know, a little far removed from reality. And I think in those cases, sometimes the jeopardy is removed because it's so bizarre and so strange that it's less interesting than, saying, the Young Kingdoms and some of Elric's picaresque adventures or encounters, where it's a bit more, when they start philosophizing, it becomes a bit more grounded. And
I suppose that's what I mean about that's the danger with the multiverse, the idea that you can, it's a knife edge, you've got to walk really with it, between it being weird and about these different universes and different planes of existence and different timelines and all that. It's great, but equally, there's a line you can cross where it becomes a little bit silly or you can lose interest in it. And I suppose it's particularly difficult in a role-playing game as well, because in a novel, you can probably be more surreal as you like and get away with it because it's a novel. But role-playing game's different, isn't it? Because you've got to get the players on board as well, haven't you? I mean, that's one of the things. It's all right to read a novel where everything's a bit crazy and you enter some weird parallel universe where everything's played a blancmange or whatever. But it's another thing to bring 3 or 4 or 5 players with you on that journey, isn't it? That's the thing. I think that's like with Rogue Mistress. That's one of your anxieties about it, isn't it? As a games master, George, every time we have a session or every time we're about to have a session, you say, it gets a bit crazy now, It gets a bit crazy. And I think your anxiety is that you think we're all going to, halfway through, we're all going to say, this is stupid. Why are we doing this? And that's the problem, bringing everyone along with crazy ideas like that.
Yeah. I think I read it in Chris's eyes, one of the players that we have, Chris Sharp. When he's playing, he's kind of got this crumpled up forehead that says, what on earth is going on now? To
be fair though, his character has had its brain swapped with a different character.
Yeah.
It's a role-playing challenge, isn't it? Because you gave us all an item that we're looking for. A family heirloom or something that we all look for in the adventure. Is that part of the adventure? Or is that something?
No, that's something I introduced because we're going to talk about what makes something Moorcockian. But one of the elements of Moorcockian is that everybody's predestined to find something that's important to them.
Yeah.
So all the characters need to discover something. So at the start of the campaign, everybody selected something that was significant that has been lost.
But he's looking for a family heirloom. Because he's had his brain swapped. So the character really he's playing is not him. It's a different person. He's already had a brain swap. It's quite a role-playing challenge, I think, you've given him there, really. Well, that's because his character ended up with intelligence of about 3, didn't it?
Yeah.
Because
Stormbringer
Stormbringer notoriously brutal and quite, we've all lost statistics to some extent, haven't we, in our encounters. So
we're not just talking about multiverse, talking multiple personalities.
Multiple personalities in a multiverse, yeah. Yeah.
I'd be interested when we look through this, because what we're going to do is put up the Games Master screen. We're going to look at some games. I'd be interested in this idea of what makes something Moorcockian. Because as you say, is it in the acceptance, or the premise acceptance, as Robin D. Laws might say, that all the players accept that this is what we're playing and we're up for it, whatever it might bring.
Yeah.
Within reason, we'll accept the situation that we're playing. Is it that, or does the Moorcockian multiverse exist in the mechanics? Does it exist scenario design? Does it exist in the characters? Or is it in the world building? So I think I'd be interested as we go through this for us to kind of look at this. So I'm going to put this screen in front of us.
Okay.
Do you like this screen? It's an Elric exclamation mark screen.
It's impressive. Yeah. I'm quite envious. I'd like a Stormbringer or Elric screen, but I haven't got one. And as you know, I'm a big fan of the Games Master screen.
Well, this one has been rescued from the vaults of Chaosium Ann Arbor by Doc Cowie in the auction at Chaosium Con this year, and he very kindly donated it to the Great Library of RPGs. So I shall now erect this in front of me.
You do.
To hide my secrets.
Stop putting a barrier between us, man. I don't mind you putting that screen in front of us.
I have a D8, of course.
Of course, D8.
And I'm going to roll, because of the number of chaos.
Of course, yeah.
I'm going to roll on this table, apparently at random, and select from this table a topic to discuss. Okay, first up. So it's number 3. Number 3. Oh, it's DCC. Number 3 is DCC.
Number 3, DCC.
Dungeon and Crawl Classics.
Yes, yeah.
Which isn't, in essence, multiversal, but that is the system that you turned to, isn't it, when you did our Moorcock Weekender?
It's not. In essence, it's not. It doesn't involve them. It's not inherently involve a multiverse, but I think it does. It does allude to planes of existence and all alternate planes of existence. It's peppered with that kind of stuff. I would say it is definitely. It's definitely not Tolkien-esque role-playing. It is not. It's got elves and dwarves in it, but it ain't. That's about all that's Tolkien-esque about it. It is much more Appendix N thing of Fritz Lieber and Jack Vance and Moorcock, I think. And it is peppered with that. Some of the spell tables refer to different planes of existence and things disappearing into different planes of existence and things appearing from different planes of existence. So it does have that. And a lot of the scenarios draw heavily on that kind of thing. So when we went on the Weekender, I ran the Court of Chaos, which is very Moorcockian, where you're summoned to the court of the Chaos Lords, aren't you? They want you to all perform this task of finding this egg that they want, and they send you to the planes of law to find it. And it's definitely, it's very Moorcock. Really is Moorcockian, isn't it? Completely, the whole idea. So it's got a lot of that in it, but it's not intrinsically like that. Don't have to play it like that. But a lot of the scenarios draw on those things as well, I think.
So what makes it Moorcockian? Because what I'd say about Dungeon Crawl Classics, because notoriously I've kind of moved away from it every time I hear it.
You do.
Fade away, but I've played it a couple of times now, and played Mutant Crawl Classics, and I've come to the conclusion that it's a very solid set of rules and mechanics, isn't it?
Yeah.
For that kind of D20, D&D type game, it feels more robust than some of them.
Yeah, there's a lot going on in it.
And I'd say that it's probably more narratively equipped than something like 13th Age, even though 13th Age describes itself as a narrative.
Yeah. I would agree.
And because I think the tables that generate story.
Yeah. Yeah. There's like a lot of dice roll, the tables, even though you look at the tables, think, blam, there's a lot of tables here. Table for every spell, table for this, table for that. That does generate narrative and generate story. You're not just looking at players and going, well, come on, give me a montage about this or that. You can roll on the table and that will generate things and people will elaborate from that. But it certainly draws on Moorcock, I think.
Well, I think it's got law and chaos.
Yeah, it's got a lot of ideas like that.
Rather than good and evil.
It has, and that's kind of a big part of it as well. It's very clear in the rules that the alignments are law, neutral, and chaos, and it makes a point to say chaos isn't necessarily evil in DCC. So it has chaos gods and chaos lords who are, some of them are a bit wrong, but equally some of the lords of law are rotten as well. So it makes that point. It's not necessarily, chaos isn't necessarily evil in DCC. And that's very Moorcock, isn't it? That it's not drawing a moral distinction between them. There can be good and evil on both sides. It's just different approaches to the universe, isn't it? That's what law and chaos are all about.
So using my test, where does the Moorcockian essence sit in DCC? Are we saying it's mechanics? It's mechanically Moorcockian?
No.
Right.
Oh, no, I don't think it's mechanical. No, not mechanically. I think it's not this. I suppose it's the setting, even though it doesn't have a setting, but it comes from some of the scenarios and some of the things in it, some of the setting stuff in it, I think make it Moorcockian. I don't think it's the rules necessarily, because the rules are sort of a D&D chassis, and that's the word, isn't it? Chassis. D&D really, isn't it? I don't think that's particularly Moorcockian, but I think the concepts in it, some of the ideas in it, and some of the ideas in some of the scenarios are very, very, very Moorcockian, I would say. That's where it comes from.
Let's roll on the table again.
Okay.
This time it's a 4.
Mm-hmm.
Now, number 4 is we talked about our weekend away when we went to play Moorcock games. Yeah. The game I brought to it was Agon.
Oh, yeah.
Agon, Paragon, really, because Paragon is the generic system, which Agon is derived from Agon. Agon, obviously, is the narrative game of Odysseus going from island to island and completing his quest home in his ship, and the stories that are generated on the island. And it's a dice pool system where there's a series of contests and you play through a sequence. It's very ordered in that way, isn't it? It's a sequence of events. What I did, I transposed that into the worlds of Michael Moorcock. And instead of, obviously, you'd be a sailor on the Sea of Fate, or moving towards the Sundered Lands, moving from plane to plane, from island to island. And I think what was quite effective with it was you're able to use different descriptors or epithets to describe your characters in much the same way as Moorcock does with the Eternal Champions. And it is possible to play at an Eternal Champion level, which is unusual, isn't it?
And going back to your thing earlier about where does the Moorcockianness lie in that game, I think it is in the rules, isn't it?
Yeah.
I think it is in the rules for that reason, because it does allow you to play. I mean, by its very nature, the whole idea is you play, I mean, the original game, you play the Greek heroes, don't you?
Yeah.
But that translates very well to playing, as we did, a bunch of Eternal Champions, because kind of larger than life, heroic characters who are as well. And this is the thing with Moorcock, isn't it? This is the thing with his Eternal Champions, who are significant in the workings of the universe. So when you look at, I want to call it Agon, whatever.
Ves and Vatsen.
Exactly. That's the thing with that game, isn't it? That you play characters in the Greek version. You play characters who can be demigods, so they have, they're the children of gods, and they have influence and they have divine favor. And the rules are all about drawing on the divine favour of the gods, and also the wrath of the gods are a big part of it. Agon as well, aren't they?
Yeah.
That's a big part of it. And that is very much like Moorcock's Eternal Champion, the idea that these people are significant and they're agents of the lords of law and chaos, aren't they? That kind of thing.
Yeah.
So, but in Agon, it's very much the rules that allow that.
Yes.
Because there's not much of a setting, is there? I mean, the setting of the original games, ancient Greeks, whatever, okay, we all get that. But there's not much in the way of setting. No. It's very much about how the rules function, how the rules drive it, and what the kind of sense that the rules create about in terms of what you're doing and how you're doing it.
And what it allows you to do is things at scale. So, as you mentioned, you take on demigods, and we had, instead of divine favour, you could call on agents of chaos or agents of law, to give you advantage on your dice pool. But the other thing it's got is a doom track. So when you take strife, when you start to fail, you'd start to take doom, which can give you some benefits, but ultimately is the cycle of doom.
That's very kind of Moorcockian. Now, I suppose you could say that it's like an ancient Greek myth thing that maybe Moorcock draws on ancient Greek myth. That's kind of assume Michael Moorcock invented all this. It's more kind of ancient Greek, but he's kind of translated that into his novels and drawn, whether consciously or unconsciously, kind of drawn on that sort of thing.
Yeah. And the other bit of the scalability is the fact that when you have these contests, a bit like when the Eternal Champions having contests, you can summon up armies. So rather than having individual battles in the story you create, you can have a whole army of Lemurians fighting by your side.
And it lends itself to ideas like that, Elric wading through a load of barbarians from Og, with his black sword. In Agon, that's the kind of image that you would get. Whereas going back to something like DCC, that's not a game that would lend itself to that.
Yeah.
But Agon has got that kind of, cinematic, large scale, broad brush thing that fits. But it's interesting that comes from the rules, not the setting.
Next one.
Okay.
Next one is Troika.
Oh yeah, Troika.
Troika, we've spoken about this. We haven't had a podcast about it, but we've spoken about it in passing, haven't we? Yeah. Which is based, again, we're going to use the word chasse. We'll use the word chasse. Fighting fantasy.
Fighting fantasy, yeah.
Yeah.
It is, yeah.
But that is a multiverse setting with random generation of weird and wonderful characters.
Yeah.
In weird and wonderful worlds, in weird and wonderful situations.
Yeah. Yeah. The idea, isn't it, that you travel to these different realms on a golden these golden barges that take people around different worlds, I suppose. Are they alternate universes? I suppose I'm kind of trying to think whether they are or not, but they certainly, even if they're not, they certainly operate like that in terms of being very, very weird. Not, I'll say nonsensical, maybe the wrong word, but
whimsical.
Whimsical, yeah, like whimsical worlds that are all very, very different without any real care for consistency or science. So it's not like the idea that you're on this golden barge traveling from one world to another. It doesn't really worry about space or breathing or consistency within the worlds. No, it's not travel.
When you talk about these worlds, they're done through inference rather than being explicit, aren't they?
They are, and I suppose it's an interesting example because we've talked about DCC, where I'd say it's in the setting, it's in the adventures, it's in the stuff there. Not necessarily in the characters, I don't think, with DCC. It's in the adventures you get thrown into. And with Agon, it comes from the rule set. With Troika, it probably does come from the characters, doesn't it? Because they do this thing, don't they? They call it like a baked-in setting. So there isn't a setting, but there's lots and lots of different character types, isn't there? And within those character types, there's suggestions of the worlds they come from and the mysterious realms that they might come from, that kind of thing, that generates the idea that it's some kind of multiverse type thing that's going on. So I suppose in a way with Troika, it is within the system itself, but it's not the rules. It's the characters, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's inferred through, there's an inference, a suggestion, implication through the characters, isn't there? Of a multiverse. Doesn't really give you one, but you could be playing some sorcerer or whoever and talks about some school of sorcery or something where you've been trained.
Or somebody who's a barbecuist.
Yeah. And I suppose it's funny with Troika because I think when we did The Weekender, I considered, and I bottled out really, so I shouldn't have done really, but I bottled out of it. But I did consider, didn't I, running Dancers at the End of Time using Troika because it kind of suggests that, doesn't it, that world of slightly crazy people. You know, like that. People are obsessed with cups of tea or something like that. Or barbecue. Yeah. A chef or some. It's kind of like Dancers at the End of Time, isn't it? Moorcock just kind of sort of, what's the word?
Indulgent.
Indulgent, decadent kind of characters. There's a bit of that in Troika, isn't there?
Yeah.
And I did consider running Dancers at the End of Time using Troika as a rule set. Didn't in the end because I had the nerve to do it. But that is more like that. But it comes through the characters, doesn't it? You know, in the way that something like Dance at the End of Time does, doesn't it? Because those novels are all about the characters, aren't they?
Yeah.
What the characters do. And that's where it comes from, isn't it? It comes from the characters rather than the necessarily the setting or the rules.
Let's see if we can get through this table a bit more.
Go
on. 6. Now, this is I suppose this is a set of supplements that I've become attached to this year. Since we had Ben Riggs on the podcast, Planescape has been a bit of an obsession.
Yeah, it has become your obsession, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Which I've not played.
No, you've not played in any, have you? No. And I think this is really inventive because this is really going back to what we were saying about D&D and the idea of multiverse, which has always been there, but it codifies it. And even if you get the 5e now, for some reason, the Dungeon Master's Guide, it immediately starts, the first page is explaining the multiverse. Now, as a new Dungeon Master...
That's what you need, isn't it? That? Yeah. Don't send them down a hole in the ground to fight some goblins. Let's do the multiverse.
So the multiverse has always been apparent in D&D, but I think with Planescape, it was an attempt to give it a bit more substance and some stories. And what differentiates this, I think, in the setting is, first of all, you've got Sigil, which is the city in the centre of it, which is like the hub where all the adventures start, with numerous gateways into the different planes. And as you pass into the different planes, they all have their own characteristics, and they're usually aligned with alignment, and things behave differently in the different worlds. So your spells will behave differently depending upon the setting that you're in. And I find it attractive because when you read some of the scenarios, they are very inventive. And I think this is one where it is down to the world building and into scenario design, because it's just something about it. They do feel quite grounded, but by the same token, more wildly inventive than you would get on the Sword Coast or in the Forgotten Realms or something like that. You have to give it a try.
I do. Yeah, I need to give it a try. You became quite excited about that for a while, didn't you?
Yeah. I remember looking at the monster manuals and seeing mod runs and thinking, who on earth would use mod runs? They're ridiculous.
It's a ridiculous idea, but they do use them and to good effect.
In the context of Planescape, they work and they have a logic to them.
So this discussion, really, what we're saying is it could be anything. Moorcock, it could manifest in anything. It could be the adventures, could be the characters, could be the rules, could be the setting, be any of those things.
But where did they all come together? I don't think they have done, have they? And maybe that's why none of it feels particularly satisfying.
Yeah, I'd love DCC to do a Moorcock one, like they've done a Vance and a Lankmar one. That'd be great, wouldn't it? But I imagine that's never going to happen.
Let's have a final roll.
All right.
Oh, it's a 1, a critical hit, and we need to talk about the Rogue Mistress for Stormbringer, which we're now playing.
Yeah, we're now playing, yeah.
So Stormbringer is guess the game we keep coming back to, don't we? And I keep coming back to, I've played a lot this year. In one form or another. I've done some one-shots and I've been playing this campaign. And this campaign was published in 1991, a collaboration between a number of freelancers, I think, for Chaosium. Without going too much into it, in one sense, it's extremely railroady because you've got to go across this path.
Yeah.
And the way that it's delivered is a series of events that are described to the play characters and they're kind of participating.
Yeah.
There's quite an egregious bit at the beginning, which is unavoidable, where the characters have demon hearts implanted into their chest, which are like significant because the rest of the campaign is about how do I get free of them.
Yeah.
And they have some peculiar effects, these hearts, because it's a demon possession. They can take over and give you some mechanical benefits, but on the come down, you start to adopt some chaotic features.
Yeah, you become mutated, don't you, by chaos, yeah. One of us has got a third eye. I've got web fingers, web toes, and that kind of thing, yeah. I really enjoyed it. Like I said earlier, you kind of sometimes say, oh, it's mad. What am I doing running this? It's bonkers. But I've enjoyed it. I suppose it's difficult to assess as well, because I know for a fact some of the bits in it that are very railroady, you've tweaked a bit to give us a bit more agency. Yeah. So I don't know how I would feel if you'd run it totally straight. Like there's a scene with those pirates. I won't give too much away, but there's a scene with some pirates, and we negotiated with them, didn't we?
Yeah.
And you said to me that in the written scenario, it's one of the NPCs that does that. You know, and you think, sure, I'd feel about that. That seems a bit boring.
Yeah.
So my assessment of it, I'm aware that my assessment of it is based on your version of it rather than completely as written. But I think what I've enjoyed about it, at first, when we first started playing it, I remember thinking, oh, what I've got into here. But I think it goes back to the Robin D. Laws thing you referred to earlier, where what you have to do is really just embrace it. You just have to embrace the whole craziness of it and go, this is a crazy kind of adventure in all these different universes with all these different crazy things going on, and just enjoy it, really.
Yeah, it jumps from plane to plane, and I think what's attractive about it is that it's quite good at describing the different planes. So I think the first one you're in is a bit of a Roger Dean type.
It's a bit like that.
Prog rock.
They all feel a bit like Roger Dean, to be fair, don't they? They do feel. I wonder whether people who wrote the adventure just got all their Yes albums out and based adventures around the government. Could have done, couldn't they? You know,
because of these floating islands that are tethered to a golden orb, which is law, and there's tendrils pulling them towards chaos, or pulling this way and that. There's this plane which has got a canopy of granite instead of a sky, which you described as a concrete snow globe.
Concrete snow globe, yeah. There's the one where you're inside out, aren't you? You're inside out.
You're turned inside out. You're turned inside out. Yeah.
But I think I enjoy it. Would I have enjoyed it at the time when we were playing? If we'd have played it at the time, would I have enjoyed it? I don't know. Because I think it is quite brutal on you as player characters, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I've started every session thinking, I could die in this. You know, you could die quite easily. And I think you've softened it a bit, haven't you? There was some climbing rolls where you said in the adventure, as you make a climbing roll, you failed, you fall to your death. Yeah. You think, one climbing roll in Stormbringer? What, when you got 10%? You're joking. So I don't know how I would have felt about it back in the day. It might have been a bit of a thorny subject now if we'd have played it back in the day, because it does feel like it gives your characters a hell of a rough ride, really, in terms of what it does to them. It's almost like it's like an abusive thing where you're playing the character, all sorts of weird crap's going to happen to you, whether you like it or not. So you better just deal with it. But I suppose my attitude to it is to just got to embrace it and think, right, what's going to happen this week? God knows what's going to happen. But I don't know. If I think back to 15-year-old me, how would I have felt about it? I don't know.
Well, there are two features of it which mark it out as you want to use the phrase old school, 'cause it's not that old school, because it's like the start of the 90s, wasn't it?
I suppose, yeah.
It has some of the features that you used to get in Chaosium Adventures, in that first thing is, it's, like you said, it's quite brutal.
Yeah.
The first encounter is a set of demons. It's meant to be a test, and then you fight, and it's, I think, it could have been a TPK in the first 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It was quite exciting, because everybody was on the last legs but managed to defeat it. But for the grace of the dice and that element of chaos. So it has that thing where every combat you go into it thinking, well, it's a long campaign. These characters have been here for a while. Are they going to survive?
Yeah, you're going to kill us all off two sessions from the end.
But it has got that sense of jeopardy about it, I guess. The other feature that it has, which is typical of these adventures of this time, is that you do have those things where, as you say, if you do a roll and if you fail, then it implies that you stop. You can't go any further.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas it's just got a one-way trajectory, this campaign. It's not.
So what would you do if you failed?
Yeah.
It's a closed lock door. That's it.
Yeah.
Can't get any
so you've got a slab of stone on top of a grimoire that you've got to recover to get to the next stage. How do you, if you can't move it, what then?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the problem, isn't it? Yeah. How do you progress it if you can't get inside and get what you need to get? Because you need to get it to go any further. Yeah. Yeah.
So I think sometimes with Stormbringer, the mechanics can get in the way of enjoying it in that sense. But I think in terms of scenario design and setting, it is great fun.
But is it, going back to the original question, is it Moorcockian Rogue Mistress, would you say?
I would say it was, because I think it deliberately references some Moorcockian elements. What would you think as a player?
I think it is, because I think you're right. It deliberately. It does it drops things in that feel very much like they could be one of his novels. So you meet the guy who's wearing modern clothes. Who's clearly a manifestation of the eternal champion, isn't he? That you meet, and whilst they might not be eternal champions from the Moorcock, but this definitely saying to you that's what you're encountering in this in this alternate universe or multiverse thing. You're encountering someone who is even if it's a minor manifestation of him, that's what you're encountering.
The other bit that makes it typical of Chaosium Adventure this time, because people often describe Master Nyarlathotep as a sort of sandbox. And it isn't really, is it? Because you've got to go from one place
you go here, there, and you got a choice, because you can go here or there.
Yeah.
You got a choice, but it is only here or there. That's it.
Whereas this is quite linear, that follow a certain path. However, what it brings to mind is Zelda. And you've never played Zelda, have you? A Zelda computer game where you can wander around the world and then you land in a particular place or a particular level, and that's got its own logic.
Yeah.
And that's what this is like. So you go from plane to plane. That particular plane has its own logic. Like, for example, you're inside out. So because you're inside out, or you're under the sea. Yeah. And you can breathe, for this adventure only, you can breathe under the sea.
But that's,
Yeah. You're going to the Temple of Pyre, and it's got its own, like I say, its own logic. It works, but only for the extent of that adventure.
I think as well what Rogue Mistress does is, and again, it'd be interesting to compare it to other adventures that have been written, not just for Stormbringer, but other adventures that were around at the time or had come before it. I suppose what it does, it takes you on a kind of guided tour of Moorcockian craziness, doesn't it? So it evilly says it's linear, but what it's doing, I suppose, is taking you on this journey of, you're going to encounter these things. You've got some agency about how you deal with them. But you're going to encounter these things because it's like a guided tour. It's like a kind of cruise around the around more Cockian concepts, isn't it? That's what they're doing. So I don't know how groundbreaking it would have been at the time in its craziness. Maybe it is quite groundbreaking. It doesn't feel like it now, but sometimes I get that feeling when I'm playing it that what these people are doing, have written the adventure, is kind of showing you this stuff, and because certainly when we played Stormbringer, I ran a bit of it. I think you might have ran a bit of it as well. We didn't play it in those kind of settings, did we?
No.
We played it a bit more grounded. It's stuck in the Young Kingdoms. You were going to...
It's just like a fantasy sword and sorcery.
Yeah, you were going to a Pantangian sorcerer's tower and doing this, that and the other. That's how we played it. Whereas the Young Kingdoms have been left way behind, haven't they?
Yeah.
The Young Kingdoms don't really... You're from the Young Kingdoms. They don't really feature in it, up to now at least, don't really feature in it, do they? Before you know it, you're whisked away and you're having adventures in different universes and different alternate realities. And we never played Stormbringer like that.
No.
Maybe we should have done, maybe.
I wonder whether coming back to playing, and a few years ago we played an awful lot of Numenera, didn't we? And I wonder whether that, as a concept and as a way of playing, opened up our minds to playing in worlds like that.
Possibly, yeah. Because we never, I was thinking about that the other day. I thought, we never really played Stormbringer like this. So if this is like a showcase of how you play Stormbringer, well, that's kind of quite interesting because we didn't play it like that.
It is perhaps an eternal quest for us to find a Moorcockian game. I don't think we're alone, because I know that Black Sword Hack, which is Black Hack adapted for Moorcockian games, I need to explore that, because that's got a Doom dice. But maybe we'll never find it. Maybe it'll be like an eternal thing.
Yeah.
Like finding good chase rules.
But he's I think he's a bit cold on the idea of role-playing games, isn't he?
Yeah.
So what's interesting about the DCC Lankmar box set, and I don't know how true this is, but like Fritz Lieber was quite keen on these things.
Well, he hung around with
so it's like you can see in the adventures that connection that. I mean, obviously he's dead now. He didn't have any input into the DCC Lankmar thing, but you can see that maybe that enthusiasm from him has somehow fed into it.
Yeah.
Because I don't think Moorcock's that enthusiastic about it all, is he,
Having spoken to him now, I think it's because it's not just something he understands the world of comics, understands the world of publishing, understands the world of literary writing, science fiction conventions, not necessarily the world of gaming, because it is its own little...
Yeah, it's its own little thing. That's fair enough. But it makes you wonder, it'd be interesting if someone tried to come up with something now, because that's fair said. I mean, it's the black sword thing is relatively new, isn't it? That's a new kind of game, but all the games we're talking about are relatively old, aren't they?
Yeah.
So it'd be interesting if somebody came up with a more modern take on it, like DCC or KSCM, or someone said, right, we're gonna revamp all this and not just reprint it or anything like that, just completely rehash it and come up with some kind of Eternal Champion role-playing game that's modern and draws on lots of modern gaming influences and modern gaming concepts, that kind of thing. That would be very interesting.
Well, it'd be interesting to see what comes out of the French Moonblade project that's currently being developed. And of course, BRP, when Jason Durrell was on, the Gold book started off as an Eternal Champion or a multiverse approach to BRP. So I think it'll continue to inspire and develop. But we need to go now. Mm-hmm. You know why?
Why?
That pigeon over there's annoying me.
Giving you funny love.
I don't like the way. I don't like what he's doing to that other pigeon, and I don't like the way that it's looking at us as we're talking. See you, Blythe.
See ya.
There isn't another bit. Thanks to Mike for the interview and to Linda for making it possible. Really, it was like a dream come true for me. I hope you enjoyed it. You can hear me on Breakfast in the Ruins podcast, talking in more depth about Letters from Hollywood with Andy Stimpson. There's a link in the show notes. I played Elric ! And Stormbringer RPG a lot this year, and it was made possible thanks to the generous donation of books from the series from Peter W, aka Random Number on Discord. They're in the great library of RPGs, but it has been fun getting them off the shelf and playing with them. Some of the supplements, such as the Atlas of the Young Kingdoms, are really well written and very inspiring. Thanks to Peter and thanks to Doc Cowie for rescuing the Elric ! GM screen from the vaults of Chaosium. Thanks to all the patrons who continue to make this podcast possible, and please pass on the episode to anyone you think would enjoy it. Hopefully, this will have given you something to think about. Maybe our desire to create many worlds and many characters in gaming is a response to the expanding universe and our fear of death. While you're thinking about that, I'm going to finish this one with a volcano. Pass me the brand tub. Until next time, adios, amigos.